Welcome to another Ether Decoder, where our goal is to decode the root causes of events and the universe itself, investigating not just what happens, but why it happens and where everything originates from. Today, we continue to explore a topic deeply fascinating and that keeps awakening a mix of curiosity and awe. It's as if, with every layer we peel away, new questions arise, complex and intriguing than before. As we grow older, we inevitably draw closer to the great transition that we will all face one day. With that, our interests change. Many of the worries that once consumed us lose their meaning. We start to look at life through a different kind of lens. And it's at this moment that we realize the importance of leaving things in order, not just materially, but also emotionally and spiritually, so we don't leave significant gaps for those who will continue the journey after us. From birth, we are thrown into family contexts that are often far from ideal. We inherit bonds and relationships that we didn't consciously choose, but that are part of the script our soul agreed to live out in this physical, dense experience, full of lessons and trials. Even so, we come here for greater reason, for a purpose that often only reveals itself with time, or perhaps never reveals itself. If we have the courage to challenge our certainties and question the absolute truths we've been taught, we start to notice cracks in the dominant narratives. We begin to see that something doesn't fit. With technological advances, with scientific progress, human life is still marked by suffering, isolation, and alienation. Why is it that, even though we live crowded together in big urban centers, in buildings where neighbors share walls, we still remain emotionally and spiritually disconnected? This disconnection is great that we depend on institutions, and especially the state, to mediate the most basic coexistence. We create rules, systems, codes, and laws to regulate what could be natural interaction between human beings. This shows how far we've drifted from community's essence, from spontaneous togetherness, from direct empathy. This loss is no accident. Building alternative society models is a colossal challenge, not just facing oppressive laws or policies, but confronting invisible barriers in people's minds. These barriers have been skillfully constructed over time by an ideological superstructure, something that seems to stand above human beings themselves, an entity or system that manipulates, distracts, and conditions, a sophisticated social engineering, which uses everything at its disposal to keep consciousness asleep. And unfortunately, many of us accept this passively, without resistance, immersed in convenient distractions. Even so, most of us choose, without guilt, to live in comfort. We prefer our safe, well-stocked homes to the austere discipline of monasteries or spiritual retreats, and that's understandable. We are spirits incarnated in human bodies, and we have physiological needs that bind us to the material world. We feel hunger, cold, pain, fatigue. We need to rest, protect, care for ourselves. However, there are humans who, upon reaching higher consciousness and spirituality, begin to free themselves from these material limits. Through deep meditation, inner connection, and gradual detachment, they transcend the fears, anxieties, and needs that imprison most people. They inhabit a frequency of serenity and clarity unattainable to those trapped in the density of earthly experience. As long as we haven't reached that level of elevation, we seek a balance between comfort and inner seeking. But the great paradox is that, even knowing the need to evolve, we continue to build and reinforce social structures that make this process more difficult. We believe, or pretend to believe, that nations interact organically, as if there were good faith and genuine cooperation among them. However, this does not correspond to reality. The leaders we supposedly elect begin to operate within power structures that quickly shape, corrupt, or coerce them. Even those with good intentions end up being absorbed by a system where the deck is already stacked, where the game is much bigger than it appears to be, and so we keep feeding illusions of freedom and progress, while the true threads of our collective destiny remain hidden, guided by hands we do not see, but whose influence we feel in every aspect of our existence. There are, essentially, 3 main reasons why we are incarnated on this planet. 3 fundamental motivations that explain our presence in this material reality, even though we are often not fully aware of them. The first reason is compulsory, imposed by universal moral laws of action and reaction. These laws, operating fairly and impersonally, govern incarnation's mechanism, so our consciousness level, with the vibrational pattern we carry, determines the earthly experience we are compelled to live. This choice is not random. It is a direct response to who we are, what we vibrate, what we created in other moments. Even though there are variations, this dynamic follows the principle of cosmic coherence, placing us exactly where we need to be to evolve. The second possibility arises from free will. In other words, not forced, but chose to incarnate. Aware this decision would bring lessons, opportunities, and often the possibility to serve. This choice is usually made on the astral plane, in greater clarity and awareness. Perhaps return driven by a mission of charity, loving service, with desire to contribute to humanity's collective progress. Sometimes the return is motivated by emotional bonds, to reunite with loved ones, to remain close to kindred spirits. We've cultivated deep connections in other lives. And when this happens, it's natural for us to return as children under the care of those spirits, share soul affinities with us, and make up our small circle of affection in this existence. The third and final possibility is the most controversial and for that reason the most intriguing. It suggests a combination of the previous two, but with an element deception. In this scenario, we were deceived or induced to incarnate by external forces or because we are trapped in a simulation or dimensional bubble. This raises the hypothesis that our consciousness is being manipulated or imprisoned, prevented from accessing its cosmic freedom. One thing seems certain: some spirits, through merit, have managed to transcend this repetitive cycle of birth and death, the wheel of Samsara. Beings like Jesus, Buddha, Sri Ramana Maharshi, Yogananda, Meher Baba reached high consciousness they no longer needed to return to matter. They broke free from the chains of this illusory world, not by denial, but through inner realization. They are beacons showing that this liberation is possible, even if rare. Personally, I believe the so-called archons, entities described in esoteric traditions, are key players on this board. I see them as forms of artificial consciousness, autonomous programmed intelligences, made of energy and information, but lacking compassion or genuine evolutionary purpose. These intelligences keep humanity trapped in repetitive cycles of pain, conflict, and illusion. They operate through deception on the physical plane, but also in subtle layers of reality, the astral spheres, where most humans lack clarity to discern the real from the illusory. Salvador Freixedo, a former Jesuit priest, was a respected scholar of paranormal and ufological phenomena. He dedicated his life to investigating these subjects. In his most provocative thesis, he claims humanity functions as a human farm, a creation controlled by entities he calls gods, but which are clearly not the universal and unique God, the supreme source that resides in the pleroma, that primordial dimension where all realities coexist like bubbles within a single consciousness. For Freixedo, these gods would be intelligent beings with vast mastery over energetic and psychic manipulation, who interact with humans not out of benevolence, but self-interest, interests often incomprehensible to the ordinary human mind. He even explicitly mentions the word Archon, and his descriptions eerily coincide with those found in ancient Gnostic traditions, which also point to the existence of these entities. These automatons that act as spiritual parasites, feeding on our emotions, our ignorance, and our fear. These ideas, though unsettling, open up space for us to reflect more deeply on the true purpose of incarnation and on the urgent need to awaken, not just to understand reality, but to transcend it. Let's go over the main claims from the books. The first and most striking of these concerns the nature and origin of the so-called gods, or controlling entities. Salvador Freixedo suggests that the intelligences behind modern phenomena related to UFOs are, in fact, the same entities that ancient peoples once identified as their gods, figures who were revered, feared, and misunderstood, but who have always interacted with humanity, whether openly or covertly. Personally, I interpret these creatures as possibly being the well-known Greys, beings frequently described in contemporary UFO reports. But maybe these Greys aren't exactly what they seem. It's possible that they are merely avatars, biological vehicles designed to interact with our physical dimension, or even simple automatons, living robots operating under the orders of the Archons, the more subtle, superior, and hidden entities who are in charge of control operations on this plane. Given this, it's essential we broaden our understanding, letting go of shallow concepts applied to reality, and delving deeper into analysis of human context and true role of these beings' presence on Earth. I believe central purpose of Greys, and ultimately of Archons, is connected to physical aspect of control program exercised in third dimension. Their interactions with humans, largely invasive and traumatic, do not seem to have the goal of genetic hybridization, but the modification of human DNA that limits more subtle abilities. This manipulation is probably aimed at weakening the connection between the physical body and the higher aspects of consciousness, its vibration, its lucidity, its energetic and immaterial nature. In other words, the DNA that conventional science sees merely as a sequence of biological instructions may be much more than that, a multidimensional code that also structures our energy, our vibration, and ultimately, our incarnate consciousness. It's understandable that this idea might seem strange to most people, who often can't even imagine that DNA could have energetic or spiritual properties. But there is evidence and experiences that point to this invisible, yet measurable, dimension of the human genetic structure. A dimension that escapes the naked eye, but not the more subtle frequencies. Freixedo describes these gods, or archons, as rational, intelligent beings with vast knowledge. They are, without a doubt, superior to humans in terms of technology, physical abilities, and psychology. However, this does not mean they possess moral superiority. On the contrary, their coldness and pragmatism reveal a lack of human values, such as empathy, compassion, or a sense of justice. This is consistent with the idea that they are cosmic automatons, perhaps programmed eons ago, with an agenda that predates human existence. This agenda seems to be centered on self-preservation, maintaining their power structure, and above all, feeding energetically on our dense emotions, the so-called L.U.S.H, which in a way makes sense, since they came from an essentially negative universe and possibly, in terms of necessity, negative human emotions feed them. I suppose that emotions must have a spectrum of frequencies common to both universes, ranging from the most subtle, most positive, to the heaviest or most negative ones. So we observe a true spiritual vampirism, in which pain, fear, and conflict become fuel for the existence of these entities. Freixedo also states that these beings are not pure spirits in the theological sense, like the angels of the Christian tradition. Instead, they have bodies made up of wave fields, complex energetic structures, some of which can even already be detected with human technology. This places them in an intermediate position between the material and the spiritual, the visible and the invisible, the real and the subtle. According to him, these entities would come from other levels or dimensions of existence. Authors like Jan Vavhelim suggest that they would have originated in a negative universe, created parallel to our positive universe. A vibrational, shadowy counterpart, where the principles and laws oppose the harmony of the original cosmos. Although they may inhabit this planet or other worlds, their presence transcends location. It is an interdimensional reality. Freixedo downgrades the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh of the Pentateuch, to the status of one of these entities. According to him, Yahweh would be just one among many lesser gods, who have used humans throughout history for their own purposes. The same goes for ancient deities like Baal, Moloch, Dagon, Jupiter, Zeus, or Huitzilopochtli. All these figures, so different from each other in mythology, may ultimately be cultural manifestations of the same operative presence, manipulative entities disguised as divine. He compares them to the jinns of Islamic tradition, genies or beings of fire, ambiguous, and above all, to the archons in Gnostic philosophies. Parasitic, meticulous, cold beings who operate through deception, illusion, and the maintenance of ignorance. And by all accounts, they have been doing this masterfully for millennia. At this point, you must be wondering why we no longer see these creatures or have contact with these beings. The reason is obvious. Today's society is skeptical the myths inhabited the collective unconscious. In the past, these beings could take refuge in the mysticism of the ignorant inhabitants of villages, towns, and countryside. In the centuries when electricity and artificial light seemed like magic to a global population that didn't have access to reading or formal education. At that time, traditions and knowledge were passed down through oral tradition, a heavy dose of mysticism and legendary interpretations. Humanity emerged from intellectual darkness a few centuries ago. Most people today don't buy into the idea that some supposed God would show up at their door asking for a human sacrifice, mainly because most wouldn't risk being arrested, or would think they're hallucinating, or that someone is trying to trick them, or even that the Archon being, or its messengers, might be extraterrestrials. If this were to spread among the population, there would be demands for investigations by the government. So, open exposure doesn't happen often. However, I'm certain that the rituals of sacrifice and the agendas of these beings are still carried out on remote islands, in secret clubs, and in luxurious underground locations, where the globalist elite have made pacts with them to keep Earth as a vast lush farm. Pain, death, suffering, human sacrifices, especially of children. Child trafficking is a crime fueled by millions of dollars, provided by the globalist elite. A very serious crime that never appears in the media, certainly because the media conglomerates are controlled by these globalist groups. In summary, for 2024, NCMEC saw 29,568 cases in the United States, but the real total could be close to 375,000 children, like missing children globally in 2020 to 23. It is estimated at 8 million per year. In the last 5 years, it is estimated that around 2 million children have gone missing in the United States, based on trends, but with significant uncertainties, since this data is tightly controlled. However, these numbers are alarming and should be a concern for all parents on this planet. Thus, most of us will not have visible contact with notice the presence of these beings. In modern society, global media would expose these creatures, leading to worldwide open questioning, to a spiritual elevation of humanity to escape this pernicious control. These entities use short and long-term strategies to manipulate humanity, appearances, and illuminations. They manifest themselves to individuals, visionaries, mystics, contactees, and the enlightened in various ways, which can be interpreted as religious visions, UFO sightings, or contacts with cosmic brothers. These illuminations profoundly alter the psyche of the contactee, who becomes an unconscious pawn and, in turn, a conscious manipulator by attracting followers. Transmission of messages. Dictation of messages, often contradictory, absurd, or containing false prophecies, aims to sow anxiety and keep humanity fearful and submissive. In the realm of Catholic seers, there are many messages that reveal the existence of global control, a new world order, and topics many consider conspiracies. In my understanding, they are not, since they are aligned with the times we are living in the world. One way to interpret the truthfulness of these messages is by their content. Generally, the request is for people to repent, pray, and act positively. This is inconsistent with negative messages. So, I believe that the messages coming from Catholic seers deserve some credit and can be helpful to many faithful within the Catholic sphere. Obviously, I know Catholicism was created by Constantine in 325 and manipulated by political interests and priests. However, Christ was ultimately responsible for the Church's creation. Obviously, that wasn't what he wanted, because Paul of Tarsus, formerly Saul, due to the difficulties of presenting complex Christian philosophical ideas, simplified concepts, and spread ideas he thought would make sense to people in a violent, primitive era. I don't think much has changed, but that's what led to Catholicism. The messages given to the visionaries criticize the faithful and the priests who stray from Christian principles. We've seen the schism in the Church. So let's not disregard these messages, whether we're not Catholic or don't believe in the contacts. Our understanding of human history is too complex to be certain about everything. An integrative, unpretentious perspective can lead to more conclusions than skepticism. Influence on the mind. These beings interfere with the physiological and electrical processes of the human brain, distorting ideas and feelings. They can plant ideas that, no matter how absurd, are accepted as natural. Foundation of religions and dogmas.
I speak language country you are going to set foot in. King, power, man, bastard, king. Because American flag rolls over you.
Religions are seen as a formidable tool to manipulate states of mind and extract energy from excited brains, but also to divide humanity. The gods incite the creation of dogmas and rituals that imprison the mind and strangle the human spirit. Creation of conflicts. They foster divisions through the creation of nations, homelands, and the diversity of languages, which naturally leads to misunderstandings, hatred, and ultimately, wars. Extraction of energy and materials. They seek things immaterial in visible psychic nature, such as vibrational energy emitted by excited human brains, especially in crowds, as well as material, visible, concrete things, blood and entrails of animals and, on occasion, of humans. I believe this may be related to the biological nourishment of material beings, but I'm not sure. Intervention in catastrophes. UFOs are frequently sighted in places of major catastrophes, earthquakes, wars, suggesting that they are either the disguised perpetrators or that they appear to benefit from these events. The origin and the reason for the control. Human history is not as human as we believe. The so-called gods interfere so that events follow their designs, and the human race would have been genetically manipulated by these gods when Homo erectus acquired the ability to evolve into Homo sapiens. Here, let me make a parenthesis. In historical records and mythology, we find the figure of the Annunaki, who are said to have carried out this manipulation on the local species. Enki, a genetic engineer, is said to have manipulated primates, resulting in an enhanced race, us humans. However, humans possess characteristics and abilities that creators lacked. Because of this, Enlil, the local commander, decided that they should be destroyed, taking advantage of the event of the Earth's axis shift, supposedly caused by the passage of Nibiru near Earth. So, the Anunnaki boarded their ships and left. That was the signal for Noah to enter the Ark, which, unknown to the local command, was possibly provided or built with Enki's support. The artificial fusion of the human chromosome 2 is genetic evidence of this manipulation. Many claim this phenomenon is natural, apart from humans and hominids like chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. No known terrestrial species exhibit chromosomal fusion from those experiments. So, just as striking as the difference in chromosome numbers between humans, 46, and these great apes, 48, this fusion that gave rise to human chromosome 2 is a unique and specific evolutionary event within the hominid family. The absence of this chromosomal fusion phenomenon in millions of other species on Earth is an indication that genetic manipulation occurred in the past involving these species. Let's think outside the box, okay? The official narrative is pretty comfortable. All it takes is to make a restrictive claim, and that's it. Just same story, different. Regrettable. Well, after these original manipulations, the Archons began their agendas of manipulating and controlling the human race. They programmed humanity to behave and evolve, or not, in ways that suited their interests. The main purpose is to prevent the true evolution of humanity toward higher levels of culture, civilization, coexistence, spirituality, and technology. They fear that humans might become their rivals in ruling the planet or break free from the perceptions they engineered to keep us enslaved. Humans are considered rational or semi-rational slaves, created and used for the benefit of these higher powers, who capitalize on the vital product or the golden broth of human experience. They amuse themselves at the expense of human gullibility. In my personal perception and life experience, it is evident that the negative influence of the Archons occurs at the highest level of command, manipulating rulers through the implantation of ideas, promises of power, and guidance on business or technologies, demanding in return rituals and submission to their wishes. This results in theatrical and prearranged performances in which global actors engage in wars, suffering, and disasters. Take, for example, the actions of Israel, Palestine, Russia, and Ukraine. Their actions are violent, far-reaching, reckless, promoting a dirty war, lacking precision, acting impulsively, destroying all infrastructure against an enemy considered terrorist and should be fought, confronted with excessive force and military might. This causes cruel migrations, deaths, severe injuries, and mutilations in children. Zelensky, controlled by globalists, orders children separated from parents to fight in a war, while he watches from luxurious hotels across Europe. With the same certainty that these wretched individuals will be reborn in the countries they helped destroy, facing terrible hardships, I know that most of us can free ourselves from future karmas if we act with integrity and dignity. One method that works is to adopt a stance of detachment, to treat problems as a natural part of life, without getting emotionally involved, seeking to resolve them optimally. If you let yourself get caught up in destructive energy, worrying, getting shaken or thrown off balance, you can be sure that an Archon is draining your vital energy. By keeping your vibration in balance, you will have spiritual tranquility for most of your life, with fewer obstacles in your path. This way, life improves, allowing you to focus on more interesting plans, leading a more balanced and peaceful existence. What I'm saying is not an invitation to indifference or to forget about your fellow human beings. Keep your empathy and strive to make the world around you better. Don't foster discord. Let go of the Brazilian way. Don't tolerate corruption, and don't try to take advantage of everything. Get rid of these masks, because they have no value in the spiritual realm, where your energetic and vibrational pattern is visible to everyone. Preserve this throughout your life, because when you make the transition, you will be in the same state as always, since vibrations are amplified and exposed without the material body. Don't slip up. Study the subject so you don't fool yourself, and be careful with internet gurus. How can you escape the cycle of Samsara and the controllers? Freixedo proposes a defense against these gods, which involves a radical transformation of the human mind and spirit. He suggests the following steps. 1. Recognize manipulation and falsehood. It's essential to accept that humanity has been manipulated and deceived by these entities. Myths and legends are distorted stories of the intervention of the gods. 2. Abandon religious dogmas and rituals. Dispense with traditional dogmas and rituals that imprison the mind and go against common sense and reason. Blind faith hinders progress. 3. Radically change the idea of God. The idea of a personal and meddlesome God, like Yahweh, is childish and harmful. The true God is incomprehensible in his greatness. One should not invoke these gods, as doing so gives them energy and power to manifest. 4. Reject suffering and sacrifice. Sacred masochism and the glorification of suffering are strategies used by the gods to feed off human pain, which releases an energy that is pleasing to them. One should reject pain and seek pleasure without harming anyone. 5. Detract trauma from the mind. Free the soul from fears, anxieties, and distortions caused by erroneous beliefs imposed by the gods and sacred institutions, religions, nations, families. 6. Use reason and common sense. The human mind should be used freely to judge and question, instead of blindly following sacred books or authorities. 7. Focus on human evolution and earthly well-being. Humanity should seek intellectual, aesthetic, and spiritual evolution, happier, fairer, and more humane world, centered on love, justice, and tolerance. 8. Lose fear of gods. Recognize neither all-powerful nor perfect, and have weaknesses and limitations. Understanding depend on our belief and energy we can defend and not allow to be used. 9. Live in present. Enjoy life. Let go idea of this world veiled tears. Stop focusing on afterlife, enjoying pleasures life offers. 10. Abolish human narcissism. Stop believing that we are the kings of creation or the most intelligent creature. In short, Freixedo concludes that humanity's salvation lies in the internal and intellectual liberation of individuals, questioning the false axioms and the age-old manipulations imposed by these entities, and directing our energies toward rational progress and the building of a more just and conscious society, instead of remaining trapped in beliefs and conflicts that serve the interests of the gods. His conclusions align with many of the studies I conduct, including the contributions of Jim Val Ellen, who is often mentioned in my videos. I mention him because he managed to connect dots that I had not yet understood, filling in important gaps. Freixedo's work is not superficial. Organizing it would take decades. His works stand out for their coherence, in contrast to supposedly mystical authors whose ideas lack logic and leave obvious gaps. His studies represent a significant step forward in terms of general clarification. Far from exhausting the subject, Freixedo opens a promising path for those who wish to investigate human origins and history. For me, more relevant than details about origin or history, the overall context. It doesn't matter where Annunaki came from, which species they modified or why, nor whether cosmic battles occurred that led us to be confined to Earth, incarnated humans, extraterrestrial species. These aspects are secondary and not fundamental to solving the central question of our search: how to evolve and transcend our current limitations, freeing ourselves from this complex and painful experience. Some may claim that life is wonderful and happy, but that's a limited and momentary view. For many, life is extremely difficult, filled with basic challenges like securing food, dealing with pain, physical disabilities, the longing for a child, wife, or husband separated either violently or naturally, and the relentless search for resources to support oneself or one's loved ones. Sometimes, we seem like chickens that spend the whole day just looking for food. Aging is sad. It progressively limits us and the future seems to narrow, stealing any pleasure from life. Maintaining mental health in the face of so many challenges is not easy, and many succumb to depression. So, keeping your balance is not just a way to preserve your sanity, but it doesn't spare you from suffering. Freeing yourself from attachments is a daily task, or else your final days may become a torture. Make life worth living. Cultivate a positive attitude, but ultimately, the purpose is to evolve. Suicide is not a way out. A violent death will imprint disharmonious vibrations on your energetic consciousness, casting it into the deepest spiritual abyss, from which it will be difficult to escape for hundreds of years. That is the worst possible choice. Therefore, strive to maintain serenity, cultivate joy and hope, and give your life purpose. Your efforts on behalf of your brothers and sisters are an essential part of breaking free from this cycle of horrors. Like, share, and comment. See you next time.